If you weren't the Queen of England 450 years ago as a woman, how could you get wealthy and powerful enough to build a place as magnificent as this?
In this film, I'm exploring someone who rose as high as a woman possibly could in the age of Elizabeth I. Finally creating this incredible house that encapsulates her own life. Not the Queen herself, but someone perhaps equally remarkable and nearly as rich, Bess of Hardwick. But how did Bess achieve so much in the Tudor world, a man's world, albeit one ruled by a woman?
It was a tricky business in the Tudor period. And women, first of all, had to navigate their way through the structures of Tudor society. Married women couldn't legally own property. And then there's the perilous business of Tudor politics. Elizabeth I was famously a prickly queen. And yet, Bess of Hardwick, that extraordinary woman, managed to do both these things.
It's 1597. Elizabeth I has been Queen of England for nearly 40 years, and in Derbyshire a magnificent house has been newly built. Hardwick Hall lies in the heart of the countryside, 150 miles north of London.
If you ever wanted to see a house that expresses the character of a person, their wealth, their taste and their power, then this is it. And if you had arrived here when this house was brand new in 1597, you would have been in no doubt to whom this house belonged, because her initials are there right on the very top. Elizabeth, Countess of Shrewsbury. We know her better as Bess of Hardwick. At the end of the 16th century, this house was the most modern and fashionable house you could possibly imagine. Glass was enormously expensive, and this house has got acres of it. It's been called Hardwick Hall, more glass than wall. Just look, the bottom floor, you've got 2 panes of glass deep, the floor above that, 3, and the floor above that, a whopping 4 panes of glass. And aren't they enormous as well? So it's a testament to Bess's wealth. But I like to also think that it speaks to Bess's character and her progress over her life. She goes from being modestly prosperous to becoming one of the richest women in the country. From the moment you come in, there is no mistaking the wealth here. You think it's going to be a single story, and immediately, look at it. It's vast. I mean, calling it double story doesn't really do it justice. And look at the scale. I mean, look at this coat of arms. You've got her coronet as a countess. You've got the stags. I mean, I think they are life-size. I think those might actually be real antlers. You've got tapestries. And this is just the beginning. This is the servants' hall. And as we come around here, we're going to be going up to the next floor, which is the family rooms. And above that are the staterooms, the kind of palatial rooms suitable for receiving royalty. And in some ways, this house plays out in stone Bess's autobiography.
I'm climbing in Bess's footsteps, up and up to one of the most remarkable Tudor rooms in England.
I mean, this is just extraordinary, isn't it? If you thought the servants' hall was big, look at this room. My word, this is vast. You could fit several houses into this one room. This is the High Great Chamber. Very well named. It is both high and great. And it was designed by Bess to be better than pretty much any other chamber in the country. She asked her son, Charles Cavendish, to find out the measurements of the chamber at Tibauld's. Tibauld's no longer stands, but it was Lord Burleigh's great house, the grandest and largest house in England. She found out the measurements for the chamber there and she beat it here. This is bigger by far. And look at the decoration. We've got the tapestries, which have been here since 1601. We are seeing this space as Bess would have seen it.
And above the tapestries is a fabulous plaster frieze of the goddess Diana, the huntress, surrounded by wildlife.
At one end we've got typical scene of country life, hunting a wild boar in this case. And as we go further round, we've got this enormous coat of arms, the royal coat of arms in fact, the lion and the griffin, who are the supporters before we get the unicorn with the addition of Scotland. And the motto is Dieu et mon droit, God on my right, the motto of English kings from 1413, used by Henry VIII among others. And we've got the garter, honi soit qui mal y pense, evil be to him who thinks evil of it. And this is clearly a testimony to Bess's loyalty to Elizabeth, that she's putting the royal arms here. And then further round, we see Diana, who is the virgin goddess. She's the hunter. Here she is surrounded by her women. It seems like Bess was very fond of bringing out these women's stories from antiquity. And there's elephants, there's camels, there's deer. There's everything you could possibly want to hunt. We have a sense here of Bess's wealth on display, her learning on display, but also her loyalty. This is a space in which she could bring the Queen and have her loyalty to the Queen depicted not only in the coat of arms, but in this allusion to a virgin goddess, to Diana. People talked of Elizabeth as if she were Diana. And so this frieze is kind of loyalty in plaster. It picks out this theme of Bess's loyalty to Elizabeth. But it also does so in demonstrating her learning. I mean, come and look over here. This is absolutely typical of this Renaissance age. We've got Plato up here, Heraclitus, and Sappho, Pythagoras, Aristotle. Speaking about Bess's learning, she knows in the classical world what is worthy of attention. She is at the height of the kind of intellectual and physical, artistic revival that was the Renaissance. Bess here has it in spades. So you've had your meal, you're absolutely stuffed, and you need a bit of exercise to work it off. Well, there is a room for that too. Come through here. This is the most magnificent long gallery. It is absolutely vast.
Today, Bess's portrait gazes down on this extraordinarily lengthy space.
I reckon you could fit a whole row of terraced houses in this one room. It's the largest long gallery from the Elizabethan period that survives in England. And this is where Bess's guests would come after eating. They would come in here, walk up and down and work off some of that food whilst the servants set up the room next door so they could go back and be entertained with some music. And you really could get your exercise in here, couldn't you?
The property curator at Hardwick Hall is Liz Waring.
This is such a magnificent building. Am I right in thinking that it's quite innovative at the time that it was built?
It is quite an innovative design. It's an Elizabethan prodigy house in a kind of English Renaissance style, which actually was only used for about 20 years. So it's based on Italian design that you would have seen in some villas at the time. Its symmetry is what's really apparent about the design of the building. It has 6 turrets, it faces west to east.
And the scale of this place is just astonishing. I mean, we're here in the long gallery. Tell me a bit about this space.
So it's believed to be one of the largest long galleries in the country. And it's, as you can see, an incredibly impressive space. And it's lined with these wonderful Gideon tapestries, which Bess actually bought while the house was being built in 1592. And so we believe this actual space was possibly designed to fit these tapestries within it.
Oh, wow. And they are just extraordinary, oversized, amazing pieces of art. But the figures within them, I mean, they're bigger than life size. From an outsider's perspective, this looks like a house that must have cost an absolute fortune to build. Do you feel that it's a real reflection of Bess's status and wealth by that time of her life?
Definitely. It's a real combination as well of her building ambitions, because she rebuilt Chatsworth in Elizabethan style, and she built a huge number of other houses. So she'd really practiced the art of finding exactly what she wanted. She's really showing off to the rest of the world that she had this much money, that she could afford to cover the house in glass. It was certainly designed as one of the prodigy houses of the time, which were deliberately made extravagantly just in case Queen Elizabeth would have come to visit. It was a deliberate attempt to do something palatial.
And it's amazing that Bess is doing all this, building this place when she's in her 60s, moves in soon after her 70th birthday.
To reach the very top of Hardwick Hall means climbing yet another set of stairs. Liz is taking me to one of Hardwick's most exclusive places. If you were lucky enough to be one of Bess's most important guests, you would be brought right up onto the roof. Walking past views over her huge estate, past her coat of arms, and finally into a very special room.
In out of the wind.
Yeah, it's a bit breezy out there.
Wow, this is a magnificent space.
It is fantastic, isn't it?
So what was this for?
So this was what's called a banqueting room. So this is known as the Banqueting Turret. And this would have been where Bess brought her really important guests to come and have the banquet, which was like a dessert course.
So this is second pudding or whatever, and it's an amazing place to come to. So you can only get to it across the roof, like as we've just come, across the lead.
Yes, so it was this roof was specially designed so people could walk across it to this place while taking in all of Bess's lands around you.
But I mean, how would they have kept such a room warm? I mean, up here among the winds.
Yeah, so unlike turret rooms, which have got fireplaces, this doesn't have one. But it was specifically situated on the south end of the house. So it got sun throughout the day from morning to sort of afternoon to sort of earlier evening. So it would have been kept warm purely by the light and the sun that came through the windows, almost like a sort of solarium.
Like Elizabethan solar panels.
Yeah, definitely.
But we're getting a long way ahead of ourselves, basking in the glory of Bess's great creation. Let's go back to the start of Bess's remarkable story. From the turret windows, you can actually see the ruins of the building where Bess grew up, Old Hardwick Hall. Her parents were relatively humble local gentry. Key to Bess's rise and fortune was marriage. When she was about 15, her first husband was a 13-year-old local boy who died within a year. She then seems to have started to elevate her status. The long gallery is a who's who of Bess's husbands.
Bess's second husband is this man here, William Cavendish. He was 20 years older than her when they married in August 1547. She was 19, perhaps 20 years old. And they quickly started having children. The first one arrived 10 months after the wedding, and they basically come in yearly intervals, or near enough. 8 children in 10 years. And very sadly, 2 of those children died. One girl at 4 months old, another also in childhood. And this picture of Cavendish shows him just a few years into that marriage. What he brought to Bess was an enormous amount of wealth. He had become enriched through the dissolution of the monasteries, and also a promise that all their lands and properties would be held jointly in both of their names for both of their lives. That meant that when he died, Bess inherited everything, but she also inherited his debts.
But Bess kept up the habit of marrying rich men. Her next husband was William St. Low, captain of the guard to Queen Elizabeth I. When he died without male heirs, Bess became the wealthiest woman in England, apart from Queen Elizabeth I herself. Professor Lisa Hopkins has studied Bess in detail.
She achieved the most desirable possible state for a woman in the 16th century, which was widowhood, and she achieved it 4 times. And that's really good going. And actually, it normally happens the other way around, because a lot of women die in childbirth. Not very many women live to be widowed 4 times. She does. And there's a rhyme, it's kind of scurrilous really, but it says, 4 times the nuptial bed she warmed, and every time so well performed. When death robbed the husband of his billing, he left the widow every shilling, which isn't actually strictly true, but she did get a lot of money from 4 husbands.
But presumably she had to do more than be a widow. She had to be a widow in whom they put their trust.
Yes. So her third husband, Sir William Sentlow, does something very unusual, which is that he leaves everything he's got to Bess. He ignores his surviving adult brothers, he ignores his own 2 daughters, and he gives Bess the lot. His family, not unnaturally, I think, complained about that, but she got it and she kept it.
Bess, the girl from rural Derbyshire, was now England's most eligible widow.
This is George Talbot, Earl of Shrewsbury, Bess's 4th husband. They married in 1567, and Bess was then marrying the richest man in England, or at least among them. He was on Elizabeth I's Privy Council. He was her Lord Marshal, which meant he was 4th in the line of the Queen's closest advisors. And this was the man with whom Bess would be married for nearly 30 years.
This was the ultimate Tudor power couple. George Talbot, 6th Earl of Shrewsbury, and Bess, the richest widow in the land. They were supremely well connected, right up to the Queen herself, able to combine 2 wealthy dynasties and furnish their many properties with the best bespoke furniture that money could buy.
This is an amazing survivor from the Elizabethan age. It is an inlaid table. It's known as the Eglantine Table. And it was almost certainly commissioned at the time of Bess's marriage to George, Earl of Shrewsbury. And it commemorates their marriage, and also that they married 4 of their children to each other at the same time. Henry Cavendish to Grace Talbot, and Mary Cavendish to Gilbert Talbot. And it speaks of happiness. It speaks of music making. So here we have a scroll with music that you could play. I mean, you can pick out the notes here to play this. We've got lots of musical instruments. This beautiful lute, I think, is my favourite by far. You can see the designs on the top of it. We've got all manner of Elizabethan instruments, Tudor instruments, and you've got games, cards, backgammon. There's a sense here that life is enjoyment, life is fun. And if you have the money, if you're marrying the richest man or one of the richest men in the country, and you yourself have already amassed a huge amounts of wealth, you can mark that joy in something as glorious as this. It's almost certainly the case that this table dates from the time of Bess and George's marriage, because we can see it in the marquetry here. We've got the coat of arms of Bess and George combined. So on one side, we've got here the Talbot, which is the supporter for George's coat of arms, and his lion rampant. And here Bess's 3 Eglantine roses, wild roses, and this cross. And her supporter is the stag of Hardwick, with the Eglantine rose around its neck. So this clearly commemorates their wedding, but it's not the only wedding that happened at that time. It's a triple marriage. So down here, we've got the most important of those 2 marriages, which is the coat of arms of the marriage of Henry Cavendish to Grace Talbot. We've got the snake here, which is the Cavendish snake, as the supporter. We've got the 3 stags' heads of Henry Cavendish, and this device here, which probably indicates that he was the eldest son and heir. And here again, the Talbot arms, so the lion rampant and the supporter, the Talbot, the dog in heraldry itself. And so this sense of them creating a dynasty, of intertwining the 2 families, and that anyone in the 16th century who looked at this table could read that information into it.
At first, Bess seems to have been keen to take every opportunity to portray herself as Shrewsbury's happy and loyal wife.
Bess was really fond of embroideries, tapestries, and all sorts of needlework, and this is a really rare example of an applique hanging. It's amazing, it's kind of 3D in places, it sort of sticks out and is beautifully worked. And these are telling stories. Bess liked stories to make sense of things. And the story here is the mythical ancient story of Penelope, that wife who waits for her husband to return from the Trojan Wars. And so we have here the qualities that Penelope is praised for: perseverance and patience. And this is pretty soon after the marriage between George Talbot, Earl of Shrewsbury, and Bess. This is from 1573. They've been married for 6 years, and we know that they were very happy together at first. Shrewsbury writes to Bess saying that of all his joys, she is the chiefest. He thanks God for her. And we can see their initials intertwined together here, the E and the G and the S for Shrewsbury. This is a loving marriage, and here is Bess promising, in the best way she knew how, to be a faithful wife.
But with the power and money came responsibilities. As a man with plenty of properties, George was called upon to guard the prisoner of the highest status in England.
And that person was Mary, Queen of Scots. For 15 years, Bess and Shrewsbury had the responsibility of housing the Scottish Queen and paying for the majority of her expenses. It was a great burden, but it was also a great honour,
And it had a big effect on Bess. And we can see this from the fact that she brought from Chatsworth this sign, for Maria Regina, Mary the Queen. And it says, Mary Stewart, by the grace of God, Queen of Scotland and Dowager Queen of France. But acting as jailers to such a demanding prisoner as Mary, Queen of Scots, put a huge strain on Bess, her husband, and their marriage.
Let's talk about the burden of Mary, Queen of Scots. So it's for, 15 years that Shrewsbury and Bess have to bear at least half the costs of looking after Mary. What effect does this have?
I think that is what destroys their marriage, and partly because Shrewsbury has it unabated for 15 years. If he so much as goes to Buxton, if he's ill, the Queen pretty much has kittens, and you shouldn't have done that. But Bess can escape that. And Bess does escape that. She goes increasingly to Chatsworth, and then Shrewsbury gets bitter and resentful. You're always at Chatsworth when I want you. But I absolutely can understand why she would do that, because she's got somewhere to escape to. It must have been awful having Mary in the house. She's quite demanding, she's difficult, she costs a fortune. You've got an extremely difficult, hostile house guest whom you have to feed. Everything they do is watched, judged, and Shrewsbury, I think, really felt he could do nothing right. And Bess just thinks, I don't have to put up with this. I've got another house, I can go there, I can live a normal life.
What about the rumours that he was attracted to Mary, Queen of Scots? What do you make of those?
No, I don't buy that. I think he sees her primarily as a drain on his income.
Struggling under the pressure, Bess had to endure a series of public attacks by her husband.
Shrewsbury soon became vitriolic towards Bess. He describes her repeatedly as scolding him like one from the bank. He said her words are full of deadly malice. He says another time that her fair words are mixed with hidden poison. He talks a lot about his honour and the sense that she's emasculating him. He says that she ruled and overruled him. He talks about the need for stuff, that she has an insatiable and greedy appetite. And he concludes that no curse or plague on earth could be more grievous to him than his marriage.
Mary, Queen of Scots, was executed in 1587. And eventually in 1590, death ended George's diatribe against Bess. She was finally free.
When Shrewsbury dies, she has 18 years when she survives him, and she's got the lot, and she almost sets herself up as a bank during that period, and she lends money hither and yon, and quite often the term of the loan is, if you don't pay me, I get your land, and lots of people don't pay her, and she gets even more land.
I mean, this is a suggestion that Bess is actually out of her time in some ways.
Yes, she is. The general perception seems to be she's got a very hard head and a very safe pair of hands.
Bess set about building her personal masterpiece, Hardwick Hall.
One of the reasons that she's able to build this astonishing house is because she can source building materials from her vast estates. She knows what kinds of things you need to build a house. She knows where to get them cheaply, and then she knows what kinds of things you need to furnish it. She's got an extraordinary capacity for business.
Bess wanted to buy the very best of the best for Hardwick, including these fabulous tapestries that have been painstakingly conserved.
We're standing in front of the Gideon tapestries. They were created, woven in 1578 for Sir Christopher Hatton, but they've ended up here at Hardwick.
How did that happen?
So Bess purchased them. She was on a shopping trip in London, and she was going to buy treasures to decorate the hall, and one of the treasures was this set.
And they are enormous, aren't they, by comparison to other tapestries at the time?
Yes, they stand at about 20 feet tall, and if you put them end to end, that's about 230 feet, so they're vast.
Absolutely. They fit this long gallery very well. Did Bess have that in mind, do you think?
They definitely fit, so whether she had it in mind before, but they now fit the decorative scheme perfectly. So they sit at the top of the fireplace, and then you've got the lovely painted frieze above the tapestries in the fireplace, so they fit into the room beautifully.
Now, these came from Christopher Hatton's estate, you say. Are they exactly as Hatton would have known them?
Not quite. So the colours have faded over the years. So we've lost the pinks, the reds, but also Bess has altered the design slightly. In the borders, we have Christopher Hatton's coat of arms, but we can see Bess's coat of arms as well. So she had to update them, so they displayed her symbols.
So she's got her stag here added to the tapestry. It's a rather convenient swap, I suppose, for Christopher Hatton's deer. It's lucky it wasn't such a big change she needed to make.
Yes, definitely. She just had to add her collar of eglantines and paint the antlers on.
What does that tell us about Bess's aspirations in displaying them here?
Well, it sort of demonstrates that she wants to express how far she's come within her life. I think that's what Hardwick's all about. You know, she was born here, her family, lower gentry, and she ended up as a countess with vast wealth, status, and buying Sir Christopher Hatton's tapestries. You know, he was one of Elizabeth's favoured courtiers. It adds to that statement.
But the fabulous house that Bess had built did have a role to play in one final challenge for the ageing Countess. Hardwick Hall received a new guest, a young woman with an unimpeachable pedigree.
Bess organised the marriage of her daughter Elizabeth to, and wait for it, to Henry VIII's elder sister, Margaret Tudor's grandson, Charles Stewart. And they had one child, Arbella Stewart. I love this picture here with her holding a little Elizabethan doll. Now, Arbella was in the line of succession to the English throne. After Mary, Queen of Scots, and James VI of Scotland, Arbella, who had been born in England, was third in line to the English throne. And some people said you shouldn't count the Scots candidates, those born in Scotland, putting Arbella in prime position. And you can tell that she began to think this about herself. Look at this picture from the year after the Armada, when Arbella was 13. She's every inch the queen. By this time, she was being looked after by her grandmother Bess, as her mother had also died. And Bess had this great responsibility on her hands. Was she bringing up a potential queen, or was she bringing up someone who could be considered a rival to the throne?
As well as being seen as a genuine threat to Queen Elizabeth, Arbella may also have been mentally unwell. It created a huge headache for Bess as her ageing guardian, caring for her at Hardwick, but also trying to avoid a political disaster.
Bess writes to all sorts of highly placed people in the kingdom, and there can be none higher than the Queen herself. What is she saying to Elizabeth here?
She's basically saying, get Arbella away from me. And it's ironic. She can cope with almost anything. She can run businesses. She can set herself up as a kind of minor bank, but she can't cope with her own granddaughter. And I think it's probably important to say that it does seem quite likely that Arbella was not well. And she's been behaving in a totally irrational and hopeless way. And Bess is never irrational and hopeless. And she's also been writing strange letters. And some of them really are very strange indeed. And at one point, she almost seems to think that the tapestries are alive and that people are coming out of them and things are happening around her. And so she's clearly trying to distance herself from Arbella, but I think she does want some kind of solution. She says she'd like to know some part of your Highness' pleasure touching this unadvised young woman here. She can't even name Arbella. It's this unadvised young woman. And what are we going to do with her? And then she goes on to say, just marry her off to anybody. And that's a real mark of desperation, because she's been so careful for marriages for her children, her stepchildren, almost everyone connected with her. She's taken great care about their marriages, and now she's saying, just get her married to somebody, get her away from me.
Arbella left Bess when she became an adult, but she never found true happiness. She died a prisoner in the Tower of London. Bess lived until 1608, dying well into her 80s, an extraordinary woman who led rather than followed.
What do you make then of the judgments on her in the centuries that have passed since her death?
Well, I think there's partly an element of just crude misogyny, and I think also a kind of view that any woman who succeeds is somehow automatically suspect. One of the things that intrigues me about Bess, actually, is she does it all by playing what you might almost call a woman's game. So a woman is supposed to make a home. She does that in spades. Women are supposed to sew. She does that in spades too. Have a family. Yes. She ticks all the boxes for proper femininity, and yet she's also a businesswoman. I think that makes people just feel, too much success almost.
Envy is what's driving these comments.
Bess outshone all the jealousy and rivalry, navigating her course through Elizabethan England and leaving us this extraordinary creation. A symbol in stonework and glass of her vertiginous rise and her formidable resilience.
Thanks for watching this video on the History Hit YouTube channel. You can subscribe right here to make sure you don't miss any of our great films that are coming out. Or if you are a true history fan, check out our special dedicated history channel, historyhit.tv. You're going to love it.